Resident Evil 4 2005 is a GameCube classic that basically birthed the modern third-person shooter into what it is now. Anyone who's played it can pull some of its most iconic moments from memory, and it's not that hard to do when thinking of the game's perfect village intro, creepy abandoned castles, and extremely underwhelming final act that turns the game's tense combat mechanics into a generic shooter. While it is an absolute masterwork, that much is true. However, is its state-of-the-art gameplay overshadowed by its weaker moments? Or is this game's shooter mechanics and horror environments enough to captivate fans? And what's Resident Evil's most divisive entry? Hey guys, real quick, just want to say thank you so much for the support on the last video. I really appreciate all the engagement and comments that you guys left. Some of you guys were really sweet. I get notifications right to my phone with every message and subscription. I read everything, and it means a lot to me that you guys like the video to show your support. It really spreads the channel when you guys do that, so thanks. Okay, back to the video. The game starts off with a recap of the series up to this point, being narrated by Leon Kennedy, whose return to the series would shock fans with his changes in character. In his debut in Resident Evil 2, he started off as a rookie cop stumbling into a zombie outbreak, taking every single step with caution. Raccoon City's zombie invasion molded him into a more capable character by the end that always looked out for others, but this version of Leon is cold and distant. Almost like he's bored being assigned his most important mission yet, finding the president's missing daughter, Ashley. After the intro cutscene ends, you finally control Leon and navigate this seemingly empty village to search for clues on Ashley's whereabouts. It's at this exact moment that about 90% of people will look at and immediately pick up just fine, but gamers in 2005 played something totally different, and for Resident Evil fans, this moment was a total culture shock. The highly regarded survival horror series, mostly known for its strict combat and tight hallways, had made so many significant changes for its fourth entry that it literally spun off into its own subgenre of games within its own series. And one of these changes was the brand new over-the-shoulder camera perspective. A perspective that we see all the time now, but was not really commonplace just yet in 2005. A lot of games at the time that were third person had the camera far away from the character and were centered, so you were always in the middle of the screen. This was helpful to keep what's in front of you in view at all times, but it always kept you far from the action, creating a disconnect. It's just not that immersive. For a horror game where what's happening on screen is so integral to the genre, this approach was just not going to work, and the tank controls previous games had were extremely dated, even for the time. Innovation was needed, and the result was taking that already established third-person centered perspective, bringing the camera closer to the character, and offsetting it so you brought all essential elements in focus. The tank controls return, but the new camera perspective lessens the overall sluggishness the classic trilogy was full of. I can't emphasize enough how important it is that Leon's character model takes up such a large portion of the screen. From beginning to end, you are immersed in what's happening to Leon because you are in every moment he experiences. You are literally alongside him every step of the way. Every gunshot, every dodged attack, and every tense boss fight is something you feel personally present for. This immersion is taken full advantage of throughout the game, but it's especially true with the chainsaw enemies that kill you in one hit. Being chased by these guys is unlike anything you could play today, and even though this game is way more action heavy compared to the other Resident Evil games, it's still an absolutely horrifying experience having nowhere left to run, knowing you're eventually going to have to turn around and face these guys on your own. I truly believe this kind of tension is something that has to be played for yourself to really get, but I hope you can recognize that while the changes in camera perspective does put a larger focus on action rather than survival horror, that doesn't mean that that same kind of tense gameplay Resident Evil fans love is lost. I mentioned in my video on Batman Arkham Asylum that a lot of games around this time had stiff combat that felt linear and sticky. While I think most games of this time show their age in this respect, I honestly believe that stiffness holds up better than anything else in Resident Evil 4. Sure, it feels terrible having to enter a menu every time you want to switch your gun in combat, but all of these micro movements you make in gameplay are hard to just outright hate when playing. The whole game is centered around this kind of motion, as enemies will sprint towards you from a distance, but when they get close, they start to slow down and stalk you instead, giving you time to line up your shots. Knifing an enemy isn't just a simple button press like most games, but an actual weapon you have to take out and slowly aim that plays as smooth as sandpaper. If you were able to move and shoot, that would absolutely break the game for me though. Being planted in the ground like a tree while shooting is kind of integral to the game's combat pacing and tension, so fixing this would involve remaking the game's entire combat system, which thankfully did happen decades later in the remake. All things considered, the game's combat still holds up fairly well. It's your standard third-person shooting, but with Resident Evil's limited ammo and herb healing, with a few new added mechanics. To start, you can do melee moves on stunned Ganados with different animations depending on the context. Shooting one in the head gives you the roundhouse kick, 2 shots in the knees is a straight kick to the chest, and doing this from behind is a German suplex, which is one of the most fun moves in the game. These moves are essential because they do damage without costing ammo, they can hit multiple enemies at once, and you're invincible while doing them, which is perfect when trying to maximize the damage you deal while not getting hit by those hard-hitting enemies. You can unlock multiple guns over the course of the game that all play differently and are all upgradable through the in-game merchant. Upgrading guns costs money, which you can earn by killing enemies or selling treasure you find hidden across the game. Fights have a natural tension to them with a lot of close encounters that keep every fight engaging. Playing this game's PC port with the mouse and keyboard makes the combat more accessible, and I'm not just talking about precise shots being easier to land, but the act of turning Leon. For console players, you're using a stick, which has a capped speed once you push it as far as it can go. With a mouse, you're limited only by the real estate on your desk, and you have the ability to look in whatever direction you need to far more quickly than what someone on a controller can do. This is important because the direction you're looking at dictates where Leon goes due to the tank controls, so having an easier time looking around means having an easier time moving around. You can dodge some of the most dangerous attacks in the game because of this. Camera acceleration is not limited by sensitivity settings, but by your own physical ability to move your wrist. This basically means that turning away from attacks to dodge them is a lot easier on PC, and it does change the overall combat feel having so much more freedom of movement. It's not quite enough to make it play like a totally different game, but I feel it's worth mentioning. Another thing I want to mention is the absolutely fantastic fan mod, the Resident Evil HD project, by these 2 guys named Chris and Albert. Jacob Geller and Neryl already made fantastic videos on what this mod did and the effort taken to make it happen. But playing this game on modern hardware is disgusting without this mod. It's a texture overhaul mod, but one that improves the look of the game and brings it up to modern standards a bit. It even enhances all of the UI elements to high definition, which blew me away the most because I've never seen the UI look this good, and there's a good chance that you haven't either. A separate mod called RE Tweaks is included too, which adds a bunch of customization options like increasing the FOV, changing laser colors, and so many other cool options. If you're playing on PC, you have to play it this way. It's free, and the link's in the description. While fast-paced action is a part of Resident Evil 4's core, survival horror elements are still maintained through the game's inventory system, which sees a pretty nice overhaul. It takes away some of the difficulty of having to take every single item into consideration for something easier to manage, without removing the strategy elements that fans love. Items like ammo, first aid sprays, and guns all take up slots, with each item having their own size that fills your briefcase more and more until your inventory starts to look like this, as you kill more enemies and get better gear. Running out of room means using some of the stuff you've been saving for those harder fights or leaving it behind, which always hurts in these kinds of games where having as many items as possible puts you at a serious advantage. Previous games would end things here, but Resident Evil 4 does something different, allowing you to reorganize your inventory to create space for more items. So sometimes all you need is some patience and some puzzle-solving skills to enter encounters with all of your resources, leaving no items behind. I like that Capcom rewards you like this. You feel more in control of what you can carry when there's more choices to make when running low on space. I've yet to mention much on the game's overall setting and story past the premise, and a couple details here and there, but this game is split between 3 different major areas, each with their own enemy types and environments that change things up and progressively get harder as you continue. You have the village that the game starts in, that slowly introduces the different enemy types and mechanics of the game. There's this castle that puts a bigger focus on combat that has a such stark contrast to the village. And then there's the fan favorite islands, which is one of the worst areas in the game that also houses some of Resident Evil 4's best moments, at least in my opinion. The village is what a lot of RE4 fans consider the best area in the game, and I think that's a fair take, all things considered. It definitely feels the most Resident Evil to me, with a color palette that's a lot more muted and disgusting, that carries a horror vibe well, which is pretty important when setting a tone early on for a game in this kind of series. Most of the time you spend here outside of combat will be finding clues on Ashley's location and keys to locked doors to bring the two of you closer together. It's a location with a lot of awesome boss fights too, like the El Gigante and Mendez, with the latter's role in the game being pretty light and thankfully gets expanded on like everything else in the remake. Mendez is a pretty intimidating character, and it sucks he's not really present in a game like RE3's Nemesis. I don't think the game would really work with a stalker element, but it's interesting to think about what could have been. The lake boss fight, though, is absolutely trash. It's okay your first time through, but it's really tedious when the rope snaps and the fight's put to a complete halt. Replaying this fight on repeat playthroughs is really annoying because you just want to get it over with and reach the more fun parts of the game. It doesn't even take that many harpoons to take it out, yet the fight just feels so long. However, the later sections like the Chainsaw Sisters or the Gondolas are fan favorites. The Chainsaw Sisters is the first super overwhelming fight other than the intro, as you're fighting two chainsaw girls alongside the Plaga-infested Ganados who can mutate by this point in the game. It's pretty tough if you're not keeping all enemies in your view, but I managed just fine. The Gondolas is honestly something I think is pretty uninteresting, and I'm not really too sure why it gets so much credit in the Resident Evil community. People were upset when it wasn't in the remake like it was this fantastic section of the game. Don't get me wrong, it's fine, but I mean, you can see it right here. I'm just shooting these guys from so far away that the game is basically playing itself. I don't really understand the hype here, but I do get why people were upset about other fan favorite areas being missing in the remake and sold later as DLC. Eventually you find Ashley and are introduced to this game's main villain, Osmond Sadler. He's the leader of the Los Illuminados, which is the cult that the village follows. Sadler's role is extremely light for being the main villain of the game. He kind of just pops in when the story needs to move forward somehow. I don't mind it that much, to be honest. It's not really that big of a deal to me, but it's definitely a strange creative choice. Meeting Ashley for the first time is going to make or break a lot of fun for people who came into this game expecting a Leon-centric gameplay loop. Since the entire plot of this game is one big rescue escort mission, that basically means you have to escort Ashley around. It's super awkward, and the technology was just not there to give her a compelling enough AI that lets you trust her to not get herself killed. So she has two modes at all times: stick right behind you, or freeze in place. Both feel terrible, and a lot of people are going to be turned off from this alone. Here's my take. I honestly think it's not actually as tiresome and unfun to deal with Ashley as people make it out to be. I know I was just talking about how bad her AI is, but hear me out on this one. Having Ashley with you does turn the game on its head and massively increases the tension. When she dies, it's game over, and that's honestly really useful to keep the gameplay engaging all the way through when you can get overpowered here really quick. The castle chapter's fondly remembered water room with dozens of enemies would not be the same if it was just you sprinting away from danger with no additional variables to consider. Managing Ashley in combat keeps you on your toes in a way that higher enemy counts and scarce ammo just can't. She's honestly not that bad, and if you are really struggling to keep her alive, you can use the common enough yellow herbs to increase her max health. If that's not enough for you, well then, this game does create excuses to put you back by yourself, even if these excuses are poorly written and extremely artificial. The castle is probably my favorite part of the game, and it feels very Resident Evil, being forced into an unknown interior environment filled with traps, locked doors, and secret lava rooms? Yeah, the castle chapter is where the game's tone starts to shift on its head. The castle has some pretty diverse environments, all things considered, with mazes, dining halls full of gourmet food, and caverns filled with one of my favorite enemy types.
Watch out, it's fucking hornets! What the fuck is that, locust? Fuck! They fucking got all over me! What the fuck is this? Fuck! Oh! Be smart, dog. Back up, back up, back up, back up.
There's even a moment where you get to play as Ashley, which is a neat addition that's also terrible on repeat runs. You have to do this puzzle at the end that I always forget the solution to, and I have to pop a guide for every time, but at least it's pretty short. I'd say the best moment in the entire game is right at the end of this chapter with one of the scariest boss fights I've ever played. The Verdugo is one of Salazar's henchmen that definitely has some xenomorph inspiration going on, and he plays like one too, stalking your location and attacking from above. He runs at you so fast, it's horrifying. I mean, you're hearing his footsteps get closer and closer, and you can slow him down with nitrogen canisters to make the fight... Oh. Yeah, the rocket launcher acts as a boss skip. I used this 3 times. This is perfect for people like me who've played this game over and over and over so many times. The castle chapter finale is probably the single most insane thing in this game that prepares you for the shift in tone for the final area of the game, the island. The island in both versions of Resident Evil 4 is seen as the worst part of the game. I do feel like its extremely large shift in overall gameplay and pace is still sprinkled with some of the game's best moments, like the laser room that was brought back in the Resident Evil movie, and the regenerator enemies that you can only take down with a thermal scope and precise shots. The noises these guys make, I mean, they announce their presence right away, and you feel compelled to check your corners to avoid being jump scared. They're truly terrifying. While limited by 2005's lighting and horror techniques, they're still incredibly scary enemies to deal with. I honestly wish they were introduced into the game sooner. Maybe they could have been in the castle at some point, or there was just more of them, but the remake does a fantastic job expanding on these encounters, so at least that's there. The island's contrast to the village, for better or worse, is a nice elevation and setting. We go from small shacks and dirt trails to cold blue hallways and steel infrastructure. It's a nice flow that visually changes things up as you discover more and more about Sadler's grand plans that he just leaves around for you to find. RE4 hits a massive weak point here with a helicopter sequence that is basically filled with enemies only using stun prods, crossbows, and miniguns. Every enemy has the means to take you out very quickly. It's this really repetitive stain on what's supposed to be the next big entry in the iconic survival horror series. At least the strikingly relaxing and inviting save music keeps you calm in this incredibly stressful moment. The island chapter as a whole really is one big shooting gallery that feels like it belongs in the next Gears of War rather than Resident Evil. While the latter half of the game does have its problems, there are still enough high points to maintain a just good enough level of engagement that will keep you playing to the very end. The jump from Resident Evil 4 to 5 makes a lot more sense when seeing the immense popularity that this game had over audiences back in 2005. It's a bold and highly stylized reinterpretation of the Resident Evil franchise, with an emphasis on gameplay that has resonated so deeply with fans, myself included. When the news of a remake was announced in 2022, the focus on delivering that same exceptional gameplay was their top priority, which makes sense when you play the original for yourself. With Resident Evil Village borrowing the gameplay loop from RE4, it brings us the question, what's next for Resident Evil 9? Hey guys, thanks for watching this one. Took a little longer to make this, but I like how it turned out. Let me know what you guys want to see next, and of course be sure to like the video and subscribe to be notified when those future videos release. Alright, that's enough YouTuber talk. Bye guys.